What Bill didn't tell you is I also got an oncologist to smoke a cigar, which was a big feat. It's 5 a.m. on a clear morning. The distant sound of airplane engines are heard clearly, and an unannounced plane lands on the runway of Vienna, Austria. The date is March 12, 1938, and a significant passenger on that plane was the Nazi general and SS general Heinrich Himmler. This was the quiet beginning of the invasion of Austria, which would begin in full force later that same day. This was a turning event for the world. But a young 32-year-old neurologist and psychiatrist in Vienna was about to realize that he would discover his purpose. Viktor Frankl was prepared for the crucible he was about to enter, but he didn't know it. In 1940, just 2 years later, Viktor Frankl was still running a neurology clinic for Jewish patients, and every day he put his life at risk by ignoring Nazi procedures and protocols, by falsifying diagnoses of those patients to allow them to avoid euthanasia. Just a year later, Victor and his wife Tilly were married. Soon they were expecting their first child. The Nazis discovered the pregnancy and forced an abortion. Victor was now beginning the crucible. In 1942, just 1 year later, Victor and Tilly and Victor's elderly parents were arrested and were taken to a Nazi ghetto just north of Prague, Czechoslovakia. Shortly after they arrived there, because the environment was so difficult, Victor's elderly father passed away. In fact, just being there less than 2 years, in 1944, Victor, his mother, and Tilly were arrested and moved to Auschwitz. Victor did not know what happened to his family, and he thought his brother was on his way to escape through Italy, and Victor was soon moved to Dachau. His mother was murdered in the gas chambers very soon after arrival, and Tilly was sent to a separate camp. But it was at Dachau that Victor began to formulate and finalize his philosophies on fate, freedom, and our attitude towards circumstances. April 27, 1945, the American troops liberated Dachau. And shortly after their arrival, Victor was told that not only had his wife at the age of 24 been murdered, but his mother had been murdered at the same time with his brother, and he didn't even know his brother was in Auschwitz. But what did Victor do? He looked at his circumstances, and he began to shape his attitude. In 1946, just less than a year later, he began writing an incredible book that has impacted generations since then, continues to be read by millions of people, called Man's Search for Meaning. In that book, he's taught us and he's taught generations in the future that we can't control our circumstances. We can only control our responses to them. We must identify a purpose, he said, a purpose in life to feel, to stay positive about, and to be able to immerse ourselves in order to imagine what the desired outcome could be. It's a purpose uniquely given from God. In fact, quoting Victor, he said, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." The last of human freedoms, and Victor experienced this, is the ability to choose one's attitude in a given set of circumstances, one's ability to choose one's own way. We all travel through crucibles in life. How we respond to them is in our total control. Cancer is a crucible for patients and families. all know that. You've seen it. You've heard the stories today. Especially, though, this focused area of young adolescent population of cancers that's been ignored for so long. But for the next few minutes, I've been asked to speak briefly about some of the crucibles in my life that have shaped me as a physician and now a leader of a university. I don't know what beliefs you have or you hold, but I'm going to speak directly from the perspective of my beliefs that I hold personal and dear. Yes, as Bill said, I was born in Fort Worth, and I'm proud of it. The only mistake I ever made in life was living in Dallas for 15 years and made a detour to Fredericksburg for a while, which was actually a great part of our life. I was born into a loving family, a hard-working family, not a family highly educated. In fact, my father was the first and only child in his family of 5 to go to college. His father, my grandfather, never learned to read or write because at the second grade he was forced to drop out of school. His mother was sick and he had to help at home. My mother's father dropped out at 8th grade because he too had lost his father and had to assume the role of a man in the family. But they gave me a set of core values. They gave me a sense of a work ethic, and they gave me a sense and a true faith in God. The childhood in Fort Worth was great, though. Saturdays, my grandfather would pick me up. We'd do things like ride the miniature train at the zoo, go to the Children's Museum, and it was called the Children's Museum then. I bet many of you didn't know that we could go horseback riding behind the Old South Pancake House. Things like those that a kid dreams about. And so growing up in Fort Worth was a great experience, and I never felt more loved. But the memories of my childhood and the significant, wonderful impact this city has had on me and has on me every day has never wavered. But there are 2 crucibles in my life that have shaped me as a leader and as a physician. Of course, like Victor's crucible, they were completely unexpected. On November 30th, 1978, as I left the medical school to go to my car, I was hit by a car in the parking lot. I was immediately paralyzed and was coughing up blood, and I felt for the first time in my life that I was going to die. Less than 2 hours later, I was in the operating room of a local hospital undergoing emergency spinal cord surgery for a spinal cord decompression. I woke up on a ventilator in the ICU, and I stayed in that ICU for many, many days on a ventilator, and most of the time unsedated. And doctors would come in, and nurses would come in, and they would talk about their weekends. And they would joke with each other, and they would talk about the medications they were going to give me or the treatments of the day. But the significant fact I remember is that no one talked to me. I learned empathy for patients and families. The second thing I learned was that if I indeed was going to survive, and now, thank God, was able to walk again, after a year of learning to walk again, I knew that God had a purpose for me. You see, it's all about attitude and the response to the crucibles we're given in life. The second crucible, like the first, I never saw it coming. I had never experienced frank, blind bias in my entire life. I didn't have to deal with racial inequality. I didn't have to deal with the tragedies of racial bias. I didn't have to deal with economic bias. Or generalizations that we all make and judgments we make about people. When I applied for medical school, I thought I was applying for medical school because DOs were licensed the same way MDs were. But in fact, I realized that wasn't the case because when I began to look for rotations, clinical rotations, I wanted to rotate at MD hospitals. I was told front, straight, and center, you're not allowed in the doors of JPS Hospital. The irony of that thing was my former family physician, Dr. Bruce Jacobson, was on the faculty at JPS, and he couldn't even arrange for me to do a rotation there. A few years later, when I applied for a residency, I was told, don't even fill it out. I spent a month doing orthopedics at the University of Colorado, and at the end of my time, the chairman of the department, Dr. Miles, called me in and he said, you know what? Quite frankly, you're one of the hardest working students we've ever had. I'd love to offer you an orthopedic spot, but I can't because you're a DO. Ultimately, I wanted to become an anesthesiologist and a critical care physician because of my ICU experiences. UT Southwestern told me they would never give me a spot. But one of my mentors, Dr. Charles Tandy, who was a faculty member at Southwestern in the anesthesia department, walked in with a resignation letter that said he was going to resign if they didn't give me a chance. They gave me a chance. I became the first DO to enter the anesthesia residency at UT Southwestern. 4 years later, I became chief resident, supervising 100 MD residents. But you know what? Once I was in there, nobody cared. All they cared about were you going to take care of patients and were you going to take care of families? And are you going to work hard? So at the end of the day, we knocked down some bias. But it impacted me that day and to this day in terms of how I treat other people, in terms of how I steer our university for our students, in terms of how when I arrived in Fort Worth again, the first thing I did was go to JPS and begin building relationships there. Relationships with the other health systems in terms of how we can get exposure for our students. But it also led to my passion to present Chancellor Buschini with a crazy idea one March day about this dream I had about creating an MD school in my hometown. Fortunately, he wasn't drunk. He agreed that maybe this idea could work. I told him if he'd build this MD school with me, I promised I would never have a football team. But that's what comes out of that experience. And when I went to do my fellowship at the Texas Heart Institute, I was on the anesthesia team with Dr. Cooley's surgery team, and there was never a question in Dr. Cooley's mind about what degree I had. All he wanted to know is, do you have my patient ready? Can we get the case done? Are you working hard? I've had an amazing journey in healthcare. And I've come to the realization that where you stand on issues is often related to where you sit. I've been blessed to sit in some incredible seats in healthcare and now in higher ed. I got to see the world from a medical student perspective. I got to see the world as a resident. I got to see the world later as a hospital CEO. Then I was honored to be appointed by Governor Perry to the Board of Regents for the university system. I saw higher ed from the backside. And now as a university president. You see, I think we often have way too many beliefs, but not enough convictions. So there's 5 assumptions I'm going to make about everyone in this room. I'm going to assume you want to be successful. I'm going to assume you want to have a good personal life. I'm going to assume you want to feel needed. And I'm going to assume you want to feel secure about your future. And I'm also going to assume, regardless of your beliefs, that given your choice, you'd rather go to heaven than hell. But one of the issues with trying to make things simple is, in fact, life is simple, and we make it complicated. Did you realize that there's only 7 colors in the rainbow? But look at what Michelangelo did with those colors. Did you know there's only 7 musical notes? But look what Beethoven and Mozart did with those notes. And did you know there's only 10 numbers? And look what NASA did with those 10 numbers. They designed calculated a way to get a man to the moon and back, to bring Apollo 13 safely back to the Earth, and also to put a rover on Mars. I could also say that look what Bernie Madoff did with those numbers. So to keep it simple, you need 4 things in your life. And if you don't have any one of these 4 things, it's my estimation you're going to have a big void in your life. Everybody needs something to do. Everybody needs somebody to love. Everybody needs someone to believe in, and for me, that's God. And everybody needs someone to hope for and something to hope for. That's our big dreams and ambitions. If you have hopes, dreams, and ambitions, and I know each of you do, you must have an understanding of your purpose. What is the individual purpose God has given you? Because it's yours and uniquely yours only. In the movie Bagger Vance, if you've ever seen that movie, Will Smith plays the character of Bagger Vance. A lot of people think it's about golf. It has nothing to do about golf. He talks about finding your authentic swing. Your authentic swing is, in fact, your purpose that only you and only you have. It's your why. It's why you're here. It's what we would miss about you if you were gone. It's what the world is missing unless you understand it and deliver on it. I'm convinced that many people walk around dead and they just haven't declared it official yet. Because we could come fully alive when we find and live out our individual purpose. It's how you make a difference. You know, in life there's two key challenges. Finding yourself, which is when you find your purpose, and losing yourself. Losing yourself in something bigger than you. So finding yourself takes two questions. First of all, what are you passionate about? What do you get excited about? What would you love to get up every morning, spring out of bed, and get to go do? Passion is like purpose because passion gives energy to your purpose. Passion will set you apart, and passion will drive you to the edge of your performance. Second question is, what are your strengths? What are your gifts? What are your specific strengths and gifts as an individual? Have you ever thought about that? Once you find them, you can't help but look for ways to improve them. Once you pay attention to them. In fact, have you ever felt like when you're in your weak spots, when you're doing things you're not comfortable in, you fatigue easily, you feel weak, you feel down? We find ourselves when we find our passions and our strengths. You need to always focus on your strengths and not your weaknesses. There's a great story about when Abraham Lincoln fired his last Union general to hire General Grant. General Grant had been a successful battle leader fighting right on the front lines in the South. But Lincoln couldn't get his Union generals to cross over the Potomac and have the courage to fight Lee right there in Virginia. So what did he do? He fired the last one and he hired General Grant. And like all of us leaders, we're fully used to, once you make a decision, you get plenty of help. I call it criticism. I know David knows that, right, David? So when President Lincoln was criticized for choosing General Grant, it was around the fact that he loved to drink whiskey and smoke cigars incessantly. And when a reporter asked President Lincoln about it, like, why in the world would you give this kind of command to a drunk? Focused on drinking whiskey. And he said, you know what? He knows how to fight. If you'll tell me what kind of whiskey he loves to drink, I'll buy barrels for every one of my Union generals. Focus on your strengths and not on your weaknesses. Then the second part of the challenge is losing yourself. It's taking your purpose to something larger than you. When your purpose becomes basically bigger than you, you have a career. But when the purpose becomes, when you are bigger than your purpose, you have a career. When the purpose becomes bigger than you, you have a calling. That's what we celebrate today. Laura and John, when they faced Carly's cancer, they could have made a decision like a lot of families and solve their own family problems. But instead what they did, they identified a purpose. And they've become lost in that purpose. And thank God they have, because through their work with the Rutledge Foundation and losing themselves in a bigger purpose, many, many lives are being touched through how research is being impacted, care is being impacted, and overall just the understanding of the AYA patients. So there's 4 parts to losing yourself, and this is what I think Laura and John did. And I would encourage each of you to consider it. First of all, they had to make a decision to make a difference. Then they had to make a decision to make a difference doing something that makes a difference. And then they made a decision to make a difference doing something that makes a difference with people that make a difference. And the last part they did, they decided to make a difference. They decided to do something that made a difference with people that made a difference at a key time that made a difference. AY cancers had been overlooked for many, many years, but the work that they have done has changed the course of that, in my opinion. So when you find yourself in success, you need to lose yourself in significance. People often ask me when I'm going to retire. I think they probably figure I'm tired of paying so much tuition to all these degree programs. I say probably never. Will I retire from this position? I don't know. But the point is, when you retire from a career. I don't think you ever retire from a calling. You see, I want to live until I die. I feel like some people get those reversed. We have the freedom to make choices on how we live our lives every day. I'm honored by Laura and John's dedication, their purpose, what this foundation has done. They have chosen to have success and significance. Life filled with significance is a life well lived. At the UNT Health Science Center, we're all about transforming lives and creating solutions to improve the lives of others. I learned a long time ago that when you can get your ego out of the way, you can work on some intractable problems using three things: leadership, innovation, and collaboration. And I have never seen this town so focused on collaborating to solve problems. We heard Dr. Albritton even mention that in the video. And I'm proud of our innovative collaborations that we have with the Rutledge Foundation and that we have with TCU and that we have with JPS. We plan to expand collaborations to all the health systems in the Metroplex because we want to work together to fight cancer, specifically AYA cancer in this case, health literacy issues, patient safety issues, and health education. There are huge gaps in care, research, and safety and education in healthcare. But together we can bridge the gaps. We can bridge the gaps through collaboration, leadership, and innovation. And that's what we're doing with the cancer battle and with the Rutledge Foundation. But we're not done yet, far from it. We are committed to improving the lives of others, and we know you all are too. I want to thank you for your support of the Rutledge Foundation. Their great work is honored work. It's God-blessed work. But be careful, because if you really get close to this foundation, you're going to taste significance like you've never experienced it. I'm going to leave you with this quote because I think it's appropriate for our conversation today around AYA cancer. Winston Churchill said that success is not final, failure is not fatal, it is the courage to continue that really matters. Thank you for your time and attention. I've been honored to share with you today. It's my hope I've done nothing else. I've made you aware of seeking your purpose.
Stay here, I'll come and give you.
Okay.
We are so honored to have Dr. Williams here today, and isn't it exciting to see the amazing leadership we have in Fort Worth in the medical community? Great things are going to be happening in the future, and I want to give Dr. Williams
Thank you very
this.
much.
Thank you for being
Thank
here
you,
today.
Laura. Yeah, appreciate it.
Okay.